First grade students disappeared on forest trip, until 8 weeks later a camper found this in a river. The yellow buses pulled into the parking lot of Oakwood Elementary, their engines humming like giant bees against the crisp morning air. 20 first graders from Mrs. Jenkins' class pressed their faces against the windows of room 103, eyes wide with excitement. Field trip day had finally arrived. The children had been counting down the days since Ms. Clark, the beloved first-grade teacher from the classroom next door, had proposed taking both classes to explore Whispering Pines Forest, just 15 miles outside their small town of Maplewood. "Remember your buddy system," Ms. Clark reminded them as they lined up, her voice carrying that rare mix of warmth and authority that made her the favorite teacher of many children. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and a small compass hung from a chain around her neck, a gift from her father, she'd once told them. "Stay with your partner, stay on the trail, and listen for the whistle." Sarah Jenkins watched her colleague with a mix of admiration and slight concern. Evelyn Clark had seemed distracted lately, dark circles under her eyes, quieter during lunch breaks, sometimes staring blankly during staff meetings. But today, she seemed energized, almost intensely focused on making this trip perfect. "Are you sure you don't want to take your class alone?" Sarah had asked earlier that week. "I could plan something else for mine." "No," Evelyn had insisted, her eyes brightening. "I want all the children to experience this. Trust me, it'll be a day they'll never forget." Now, as they loaded the children onto bus 14, Sarah couldn't shake a strange feeling of unease. She had planned to attend herself, but a last-minute family emergency had forced her to send 2 parent volunteers in her place, Robert Mitchell and Diana Chin, both reliable parents who had chaperoned before. "Ms. Clark, are there bears in the forest?" little Emma Peterson asked, clutching her dinosaur lunchbox as they boarded. "No bears," Ms. Clark assured her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just adventures waiting to happen." The bus ride was filled with children's songs and excited chatter. Ms. Clark sat alone in the front seat, reviewing what appeared to be a map. Robert noticed she'd crossed out the main trail marked by the park rangers and had drawn in an alternative route with red pen. "Taking a detour?" he asked casually, pausing in the aisle beside her. Ms. Clark quickly folded the map. "Just a slight adjustment. The ranger mentioned the main trail has some muddy sections after yesterday's light rain. This route is more scenic anyway." Robert nodded, though something in her tone made him hesitate before continuing down the aisle to help a child with a tangled backpack strap. At the trailhead, the sky was clear blue, a perfect day for hiking. Ms. Clark gathered the children in a circle, kneeling down to their level. "Today, we're going to be explorers," she told them, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the children lean in closer. "We'll see things most people never notice because they're too busy looking at their phones instead of the world around them. Who's ready for an adventure?" 20 small hands shot into the air, accompanied by eager squeals. Diana took photos of the group before they set off, posting one to the school's parent communication app with the caption, "Adventure begins! First graders exploring Whispering Pines today." It would later become the last known photograph of the group together. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. The children identified birds from their classroom nature books, collected interesting leaves, and marveled at a family of deer that crossed their path. Ms. Clark seemed to relax, pointing out interesting fungi and telling stories about forest creatures that had the children captivated. Around noon, they stopped in a small clearing for lunch. The children spread out on the soft pine needles, trading sandwich halves and comparing juice boxes. Robert and Diana sat together on a fallen log, keeping count as the children played nearby. "Is it just me?" Diana whispered. "Or is Evelyn taking us deeper than the usual school trail? I've hiked here before, and I don't recognize this area." Robert frowned. "I noticed that too. She said something about avoiding mud, but..." A distant rumble interrupted him. Both adults looked up at the sky, which had suddenly darkened. What had been scattered clouds merely an hour ago had transformed into an ominous gray mass. "That wasn't in the forecast," Diana said, pulling out her phone. "No service." "Great." Ms. Clark clapped her hands. Children! Pack up quickly. We need to move before the rain starts. Shouldn't we head back? Robert suggested, helping gather scattered lunch boxes. That storm looks serious. There's a shelter ahead. Ms. Clark replied without hesitation. It's closer than going back. Follow me. Before either chaperone could question further, she was already leading the children down a barely visible path, moving with surprising speed and purpose. The first drops of rain began to fall as the group hurried deeper into the forest, the trees growing denser around them. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity. What started as sprinkles quickly transformed into sheets of rain, accompanied by dramatic cracks of thunder that sent several children into tears. The forest floor turned slick, visibility dropped to mere feet, and suddenly staying together became a desperate challenge. Form a line! Ms. Clark called out, her voice nearly lost in the downpour. Hold hands! Robert found himself at the back of the line, helping Zach Thomas, who had slipped in the mud. When he looked up again, the front of the line had disappeared into the curtain of rain. Diana was somewhere in the middle, he thought, but couldn't be sure. Ms. Clark? He called. Diana? Wait up! The only answer was thunder and the relentless drumming of rain on leaves. The storm lasted 22 minutes. It would later be described by meteorologists as a microburst, a small but intense downdraft that can cause damage similar to a tornado. When it finally passed, leaving behind a forest dripping with water and scattered with broken branches, Robert and Diana found themselves alone with just 3 terrified children who had been at the back of the line. Where are the others? Diana asked, her voice rising with panic as she spun in a circle, scanning the surrounding forest. Ms. Clark? Children? They called until their voices grew hoarse. The 3 remaining children, Zach, Lily, and Marcus, huddled together, shivering despite the emergency blankets from Robert's hiking pack. They must have continued on the path. Robert reasoned, though doubt crept into his voice. Maybe they found that shelter she mentioned. They followed what they thought was the path for another half hour, calling constantly, before Diana's phone finally captured a weak signal. With trembling fingers, she dialed 911. 21st graders and their teacher are missing in Whispering Pines Forest, she reported, trying to keep her voice steady for the sake of the 3 frightened children watching her with wide eyes. We got separated in the storm. Please, you have to help us find them. By nightfall, the search had begun in earnest. Park rangers, local police, and volunteer firefighters combed the immediate area with flashlights and search dogs. By morning, the story had made regional news. By the following evening, it was national. Entire class vanishes in forest storm, read the headlines. The search expanded daily. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned from above. Volunteers from 3 counties formed search lines, meticulously covering acre after acre of dense woodland. Professional trackers found footprints that led in circles before disappearing on rocky ground. A child's hair ribbon was discovered caught on a branch 2 miles from where they were last seen. A single small sneaker, identified as belonging to Emma Peterson, was found near a stream another mile beyond that. But of Ms. Clark and the 17 missing children, there was no sign. Days turned into weeks. Hope began to fade like the summer greenery giving way to early autumn colors. Parents kept vigil at the forest's edge, many refusing to leave even to sleep. Some brought tents, creating a small, sorrowful camp that news reporters began calling Waiting Wood. We'll find them. Sheriff Anderson promised at each daily briefing, though the certainty in his voice diminished with each passing day. We won't stop looking. But after 7 weeks of searching without result, resources began to be redirected. The daily search parties dwindled to weekly outings. The national news crews packed up their satellite trucks. The FBI agents who had been called in withdrew to focus on other cases, leaving just a single liaison officer behind. In their absence, a terrible silence fell over Maplewood. The school reopened, but room 104, Ms. Clark's classroom, remained empty, its door closed. A memorial of stuffed animals, children's drawings, and candles grew outside the school entrance. parents of the missing children moved through town like ghosts, hollow-eyed and diminished. The prevailing theory had become grimly accepted. The storm had driven the group off a cliff or into a ravine too remote to be discovered yet. Specialists in grief counseling were brought in to help the community begin to accept the unthinkable, that their children were never coming home. And then, exactly 8 weeks after the disappearance, 16-year-old Jake Collins was fishing along Blackwater River, nearly 12 miles downstream from where the children had vanished. What caught his eye wasn't a fish but something red snagged on a tangle of branches in the water, a small, waterlogged object he initially mistook for a child's toy. Wading into the cold autumn water to investigate, Jake felt his heart slam against his ribs when he realized what he held in his hands: a video camera, its once bright casing now dulled by weeks of submersion, but its memory card possibly intact. Jake had no way of knowing that this chance discovery would shatter every assumption about what had happened in Whispering Pines Forest, or that the camera's sodden contents would reveal a truth more disturbing than anyone in Maplewood had dared imagine. Sheriff Anderson was about to make the hardest phone call of his 27-year career. After 8 grueling weeks, the county had finally made the decision to scale back the search for Ms. Clark and the 17 missing children to a recovery operation, rather than a rescue. Resources were depleted, morale was at rock bottom, and winter was approaching. The search would continue, but with reduced personnel and frequency. It was time to prepare the families for the possibility they might never have answers. His finger hovered over the conference call button when Deputy Ramirez burst through his office door without knocking. "They're getting messages," she said breathlessly. "All of them. Every single parent." "What?" The sheriff's exhaustion lifted as he stood. "What messages?" Deputy Ramirez held out her phone. On the screen was a text forwarded from Andrea Peterson, Emma's mother. "Your children are alive. Pay if you want them back. $3,000. Instructions to follow. Tell no one or they disappear forever." The timestamp showed it had been sent 20 minutes ago. Within the hour, they confirmed that all 17 families had received identical messages, either as texts or emails, each from different anonymous accounts. The demand was always the same, $3,000 per child, with payment instructions promised soon. "It doesn't make sense," Detective Michael said during the hastily assembled meeting at the station. $51,000 split 17 ways? That's chump change for a kidnapping. And why wait 8 weeks to make contact? "Because it's not real," Sheriff Anderson replied grimly. "Some sick opportunist is taking advantage of grieving parents." But something nagged at him: the timing. The very day they decided to scale back the search, these messages appear? It seemed too coincidental. Against the department's advice, 6 families pooled their money immediately, desperate for any hope. The others waited anxiously, torn between fear of being scammed and terror at possibly abandoning their children. Meanwhile, the investigation took an unexpected turn when Robert Mitchell, one of the parent chaperones, came forward with new information. "I've been replaying that day over and over," he told Sheriff Anderson, sitting rigidly in the hard plastic chair across from the sheriff's desk. "Something's been bothering me about Ms. Clark's behavior." He described how she had changed the hiking route from the official plan. "She told me it was because of mud, but there hadn't been much rain. And she seemed prepared for it. Like she'd planned that route all along." The sheriff leaned forward. "Why didn't you mention this before?" Robert's face crumpled. "I didn't think it mattered. I thought they'd gotten lost in the storm, that it was just a horrible accident. But these ransom demands, they've got me thinking differently." A background check into Evelyn Clark's life revealed troubling circumstances the school had been unaware of. 6 months prior, she had filed for bankruptcy after accumulating massive medical debt caring for her mother, who had died of cancer the previous year. More recently, her ex-husband had filed for full custody of their 7-year-old son, citing her unstable behavior following her mother's death. Diana Chin, the other chaperone, recalled something else. Ms. Clark had taken an unusual interest in an old hunting cabin deep in the woods, mentioned during a staff meeting months earlier when a colleague had talked about local history. "She kept asking where exactly it was," Diana remembered. Whether it was still standing, if anyone used it anymore. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation. As investigators dug deeper, the picture of Ms. Clark transformed from dedicated teacher to desperate woman on the verge of losing everything she cared about. Then came the second wave of messages, exactly 24 hours after the first. Proof of life coming. Prepare payment in cash. 3 days. The entire town held its breath, waiting for the promised proof. Parents barely slept, phones clutched in their hands. Police monitored every digital communication possible, trying to trace the origin of the messages, but they seemed to bounce through multiple servers across different countries. Could she have really taken them? Andrea Peterson asked during a community meeting, her voice breaking. Our Evelyn? The woman who brought soup when Zach had the flu? Who stayed late every day to help Emma with her reading? Nobody had an answer that didn't feel like betrayal. And just when the tension had reached a breaking point, with the 3-day deadline approaching and no proof provided, 16-year-old Jake Collins walked into the sheriff's office, holding a dripping wet camera in a plastic bag. I found this in the river, he said simply. I think you need to see what's on it. The technical department worked through the night on the damaged camera. By morning, Sheriff Anderson, Detective Michaels, and Deputy Ramirez huddled around a computer screen in the cramped evidence room. The memory card had survived its time in the river. Waterproof casings had done their job, but nobody was prepared for what they were about to witness. The first few minutes of footage showed what they expected: children laughing, pointing at birds, collecting leaves. Ms. Clark's voice narrating their discoveries. Normal field trip moments captured for a classroom project, most likely. Then the timestamp jumped. The lighting changed, darker, indoor. The camera appeared to be set on something stable, partially hidden, its lens capturing a dim room with rough wooden walls. A cabin. 17 children sat huddled together on the floor, some crying softly, others staring with vacant expressions. They looked thin but not starved, frightened but not injured. One little girl, Emma Peterson, repeatedly whispered, "I want to go home," while a boy beside her kept shushing her, eyes darting toward a door out of frame. "Quiet now," came a woman's voice from somewhere off camera. Ms. Clark's voice, but different somehow, tighter, higher pitched. "Remember our rules. If you make noise, the forest monsters might hear us. If they find us, we'll never be able to go home." Several of the children whimpered in response. A small boy raised his hand tentatively, the way children do in classrooms. "Miss Clark," he asked, his voice barely audible. "You said yesterday we could call our mommies and daddies soon. Is it soon yet?" The camera shook slightly, as if someone had bumped whatever it was resting on. Ms. Clark moved into frame, kneeling down before the children. Her appearance shocked the watching officers. Her hair was wild, unwashed, her clothes dirty. Most disturbing was her expression, a feverish intensity that bordered on mania. "Not yet, Tyler," she said with unnatural brightness. "But soon. They'll pay the special money, and then we can all go home together. Or maybe," her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, "maybe we'll find a new home, far away, where nobody can separate us. Wouldn't that be an adventure?" The footage continued for another 20 minutes, Ms. Clark leading the children in whispered songs, distributing small portions of food, tucking blankets around them as they prepared to sleep on makeshift bedding on the floor. Throughout it all, she maintained the fiction about forest monsters, constantly reminding them to stay quiet and hidden. Most disturbing was how she referred to herself as their new mommy several times. "She's lost her mind," Deputy Ramirez whispered, her hand covering her mouth in horror. The final section of footage appeared accidental, as if she'd forgotten the camera was recording. Ms. Clark sat alone at a crude table, writing identical messages on small pieces of paper. The camera angle revealed just enough to see she was creating the ransom notes. 3,000 each, she muttered to herself. 51,000 total. Enough to start over somewhere new. Enough for food and rent for a while. Enough for medicine. She paused, dropping her head into her hands. I can't lose another child. I won't. Sheriff Anderson switched off the screen, his face ashen. She's planning to take them somewhere else with the ransom money. Probably across the state line, maybe even the country. At least we know they're alive, Detective Michael said, already reaching for the phone. But this isn't a standard kidnapping. She's having some kind of psychotic break. The hunting cabin, Deputy Ramirez realized. That's where they must be. The one Diana mentioned. Sheriff Anderson nodded grimly. Get a map of all known hunting structures in the forest. And call in the county psychologist. We're not storming in there with tactical gear. One wrong move and those kids could be traumatized even further, or worse. Within hours, the station transformed into Command Central. The parents were called in one by one, shown just enough of the footage to confirm their children were alive, but not the more disturbing segments with Ms. Clark's bizarre behavior. She's having a severe mental health crisis, the county psychologist explained to the assembled team. The death of her mother, financial collapse, losing custody of her son, it created a perfect storm. In her broken state, she's likely conflated these children with her own child. She may genuinely believe she's protecting them. Outside, news had spread through the town like wildfire. A crowd gathered in the station parking lot, parents not allowed inside, community members holding vigil, and reporters jostling for position. We know where they are, Sheriff Anderson announced to the room of officers, search and rescue personnel, and medical staff. But this will be the most delicate extraction many of us have ever attempted. These children have been held for 8 weeks by someone they trusted who's now psychologically unstable. Our priority is bringing them home without any further trauma. As maps were spread across tables and rescue scenarios discussed, a deputy burst through the door, breathless. Sheriff, you need to see this, he said, holding out his phone. Every parent just received another message. The text displayed on the screen sent a chill through the room. I can hear the helicopters. They've found us. If you want your children, come alone. No police. I'll send coordinates. We're running out of time. The coordinates arrived 20 minutes later. They pinpointed a location deep in the northern section of Whispering Pines, almost 8 miles from the original search area. A quick satellite view confirmed a small structure nearly invisible beneath the dense tree canopy, the old hunting cabin, exactly where the Forest Service records had indicated, but somehow overlooked during the initial search. She knows we found her, Sheriff Anderson said, staring at the map. But she doesn't know how. The discovery of Ms. Clark's motivations had come together rapidly once they had access to her personal records. Detective Michaels spread the documents across the conference table, medical bills with red final notice, stamps, court filings from her ex-husband seeking full custody, and psychiatric evaluations suggesting she had been experiencing increasing paranoid delusions following her mother's death. Her breaking point came 3 days before the field trip. Detective Michaels explained, holding up a court notification. The judge granted temporary full custody to her ex-husband. She lost her son, Jason, the same day she finalized this field trip. So she replaced him? Deputy Ramirez asked, her voice hollow. Not just replaced. In her mind, she's saving these children, the psychologist interjected. Her notes show she believed the world was becoming too dangerous. That parents weren't protecting their children properly. The storm during the hike wasn't planned, but she seized the opportunity it created. And the cabin? Sheriff Anderson asked. Belonged to her grandfather. She spent summers there as a child. It's been abandoned for years, but she knew exactly where it was and how to reach it, a place she associated with safety and happiness. They needed to move quickly but carefully. The tactical team suggested a straightforward raid, but the psychologist strongly advised against it. She's not a typical hostage taker. She genuinely believes she's protecting these children. If she feels cornered or threatened, she might try to save them from what she perceives as danger, potentially by fleeing deeper into the wilderness or... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. In a decision that went against all standard protocol, Sheriff Anderson proposed a radical approach, allow one parent to make contact as requested, but with extensive preparation and backup in position. Andrea Peterson volunteered immediately. Emma trusts me. If she sees me, the other children will respond too. The plan formed rapidly. Andrea would approach the cabin alone, appearing to comply with Ms. Clark's demands. A team of officers, medics, and psychologists would remain hidden but close by. They would carry no visible weapons. Their goal was simple: calm Ms. Clark, secure the children, and get everyone out safely. As they prepared, more pieces of Ms. Clark's troubled mind came to light. Her laptop, recovered from her apartment, contained hundreds of files about wilderness survival, homeschooling methods, and remote communities. Most disturbing were the detailed plans for relocating with the children to a compound in northern Canada, documents created months before the field trip. This wasn't a spontaneous break, Detective Michaels realized. She's been planning this for a long time. A colleague from the school provided the final missing piece. Ms. Clark had lost her teaching position effective the end of the semester due to budget cuts. The field trip was meant to be one of her last activities with the school. She was losing everything, the psychologist said softly. Her mother, her son, her home, her job. In her fractured state, these children became her lifeline, something she could still control, still protect, still nurture. As the rescue team prepared to move out, Sheriff Anderson pulled Andrea aside. You'll be wearing a wire, but we won't intervene unless absolutely necessary. Remember what we discussed: stay calm, be empathetic, don't challenge her reality directly. Your only job is to keep her talking while we position the team to safely extract the children. Andrea nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she was fitted with the hidden microphone. Just tell me one thing, she whispered. Will my daughter know me? After 2 months of whatever she's been telling them, will Emma still recognize her own mother? The psychologist squeezed her shoulder gently. Children are remarkably resilient. The video shows they haven't been physically harmed. They know something is wrong, even if they've been confused by Ms. Clark's stories. Once they see you, their real memories will start to reassert themselves. As dusk approached, 3 unmarked vehicles departed for the forest edge nearest the coordinates. The operation needed to conclude before full dark. Andrea would hike in the final mile alone, as instructed, while the team established a perimeter. Every person involved understood the stakes: 17 young lives hanging in the balance, and one deeply disturbed woman who still had the power to vanish with them into the vast wilderness if startled or threatened. Remember, Sheriff Anderson said in the final briefing, this isn't just about rescuing those children. It's about bringing Ms. Clark in safely too. She needs help, not punishment. As Andrea disappeared into the tree line, a singular thought echoed through everyone's mind. After 8 long weeks of searching, they were finally going to bring those children home, if everything went according to plan. Andrea Peterson followed the narrow deer trail, guided by the GPS coordinates on her phone. Every snapping twig made her heart leap. The forest, once a place of weekend family hikes, now felt menacing, a living entity that had swallowed her daughter whole and might refuse to give her back. 200 meters ahead came the whispered voice of Deputy Ramirez through her earpiece. The rescue team had deployed in a wide circle, moving silently through the underbrush. Nobody would approach until Andrea had made contact. She stopped at the edge of a small clearing. There, almost invisible against the backdrop of pine and shadow, stood the cabin. It was smaller than she'd imagined: weathered gray boards, a sagging roof patched with tarps, thin spirals of smoke rising from a metal chimney. If not for the coordinates, she might have walked right past it. I see it, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We're in position, came Sheriff Anderson's reply. Remember, stay calm, make no sudden movements, and follow her lead initially. We need her comfortable enough to let you inside. Andrea took a deep breath and stepped into the clearing. Almost immediately, the cabin door cracked open. Stop there. Ms. Clark's voice was hoarse but commanding. Show me your hands. Are you alone? Yes, Evelyn. It's just me, Andrea. Emma's mom. She raised her hands, turning slowly to show she carried nothing except a small backpack. I brought what you asked for. The money. There was a long pause before the door opened wider. Ms. Clark stepped onto the small porch, a hunting rifle held loosely in her hands. The sight of her made Andrea gasp involuntarily. The once polished teacher was almost unrecognizable, hair matted, clothes dirty, face gaunt with dark circles under wild eyes. But most shocking was her expression, a mixture of fear, suspicion, and something like triumph. You came alone, she said, scanning the Trilene. I didn't think you would. The others didn't believe me when I said your children were in danger. Andrea forced herself to stay calm, remembering the psychologist's advice. Don't challenge her reality. Work within it. I believed you, she said softly. I know you're trying to protect them. Can I see Emma? Please? Ms. Clark studied her face, then nodded once. You can see all of them. But no tricks. The forest is still watching us. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly organized. A small wood stove provided heat. Makeshift beds lined the walls. Children's drawings were taped to every surface. And there, huddled together on blankets in the far corner, were 17 pale, thin faces, all turned toward the door with expressions of shock and desperate hope. Mommy? Emma's small voice broke the silence. She started to rise, but froze when Ms. Clark raised her hand. Careful, Ms. Clark warned. Remember what I told you about running? Andrea felt her legs trembling as she knelt down, her eyes locked on her daughter. Hi, sweetheart, she managed, her voice breaking. I've missed you so much. Ms. Clark said the forest monsters would eat us if we tried to leave. A small boy whispered. She said you couldn't find us because it wasn't safe. There are no monsters, Tyler, Andrea said gently, watching Ms. Clark's face. Just people who were very, very worried about you. Ms. Clark's grip tightened on the rifle. You don't understand. I saved them. When the storm came, it was a sign. A chance to protect them from everything that's wrong with the world. Her voice rose, becoming frantic. My own son was taken from me. Do you know what that feels like? To have your child ripped away? I do know, Andrea answered truthfully. For 8 weeks, I've felt that pain every single day. We all have. She gestured toward the children. And their parents feel it too. Something flickered in Ms. Clark's eyes, a moment of clarity breaking through the delusion. She looked at the children as if truly seeing them for the first time. I just wanted to keep them safe, she whispered. From everything that hurt me. Outside, the rescue team watched through thermal imaging as the heat signatures of Andrea and Ms. Clark moved around the cabin. When they saw Ms. Clark set down the rifle and sink to her knees, Sheriff Anderson gave the signal. The extraction happened with methodical precision. Medical staff entered first, followed by officers trained in dealing with psychological crises. Ms. Clark offered no resistance as she was gently guided outside. The children were wrapped in emergency blankets, given medical checks, and prepared for transport. Emma clung to her mother, refusing to let go even as they were led out of the cabin. The monsters won't get us, she kept asking. No monsters, Andrea promised, tears streaming down her face. Just trees and sky and the path home. As dusk deepened into night, 17 flashlight beams cut through the darkness, guiding 17 children back toward waiting vehicles. Behind them, Sheriff Anderson walked beside Ms. Clark, who moved in a daze, occasionally stopping to look back at the cabin as if trying to understand what had happened there. Will they take my son too? She asked him quietly. We're going to get you help, Evelyn, he answered, choosing his words carefully. For everything. By midnight, the forest fell silent again, empty of all human presence. The cabin door swung slowly in the night breeze, the abandoned sanctuary of a fractured mind gradually being reclaimed by shadows and whispers of wind through pine needles. Maplewood Community Hospital had never seen a night like this one. 17 children occupied an entire wing, undergoing thorough medical examinations while reuniting with shell-shocked parents. Doctors reported the children were dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise physically unharmed. The psychological evaluation would take longer. She never heard us, Emma told the gentle-voiced therapist who sat cross-legged on the floor beside her hospital bed. She said she was saving us from the bad things outside. Sometimes she'd cry at night when she thought we were sleeping. Similar stories emerged from each child. Ms. Clark had maintained strict routines: morning lessons using books from the cabin's shelves, ration meals, bedtime stories. They were forbidden from going outside except for brief, supervised moments. She'd convinced them that search helicopters were dangerous machines, and taught them to hide whenever they heard engines. Across town in the psychiatric ward, Evelyn Clark sat motionless on the edge of a bed, responding mechanically to the doctor's questions. The brilliant, dedicated teacher had vanished, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman struggling to distinguish between reality and the elaborate protective fantasy she'd constructed. "I just wanted to keep them safe," she repeated whenever asked about her actions. "Like I couldn't keep Jason safe." 3 days after the rescue, Sheriff Anderson called a town meeting in the high school gymnasium. Nearly everyone in Maplewood attended: parents clutching their recovered children, teachers, search volunteers, even teenagers like Jake Collins, whose river discovery had broken the case. "This community has experienced a trauma unlike any other," the sheriff began, his voice echoing in the crowded space. 17 families have gotten miraculous second chances. But there's another family still suffering, one we need to talk about. He explained what they'd learned about Ms. Clark's mental breakdown, the perfect storm of grief, financial ruin, and losing custody of her son that had fractured her sense of reality. The county prosecutor has agreed that criminal charges would serve no purpose. He continued over scattered murmurs. Ms. Clark will remain under psychiatric care for as long as necessary. Her ex-husband has agreed to bring their son for supervised visits once her doctors approve. Andrea Peterson stood, still holding Emma's hand. "I hated Evelyn for weeks," she said, her voice trembling. "I imagined terrible things. But when I saw her in that cabin, I didn't see a monster. I saw someone who'd lost everything and couldn't bear to lose anything more." She looked around the gymnasium. "Our children are home. Now we need to help them heal, and that includes helping them understand what happened to their teacher." The healing process moved in fits and starts. The children returned to school gradually, now attending Mrs. Jenkins' combined class. Room 104 remained closed, its contents packed away. Therapists worked with the children both individually and as a group, helping them process their ordeal through art, play, and carefully guided discussions. Some nights were harder than others. Many children struggled with separation anxiety and fear of storms. Parents formed support groups, sharing techniques for handling nightmares and answering difficult questions about why Ms. Clark had taken them. 6 weeks after the rescue, Diana Chin proposed a community healing project. "The children need closure," she explained to the parent committee. "Something tangible to mark their return and help them move forward." On a crisp Saturday morning in early December, the entire town gathered at Maplewood Park. 17 children stood in a semicircle around a small oak sapling, each holding a colorful ribbon. "This tree will grow as you grow," Mrs. Jenkins told them, kneeling to their level just as Ms. Clark once had. "When you look at it, remember how strong you are, and how much this community loves you." One by one, each child tied their ribbon to a branch and scooped a small handful of soil into the planting hole. Emma went last, hesitating before adding her pink ribbon. "Can I tie one for Ms. Clark too?" she asked softly. Andrea exchanged glances with the other parents, then nodded. From her pocket, she produced a simple white ribbon. Together, mother and daughter tied it to the highest branch they could reach. As the ceremony concluded, Sheriff Anderson stepped forward with a small bronze plaque to be placed beside the tree. It read simply, "For the children of Maplewood, lost and found. For Evelyn, still finding her way. May healing touch us all." In the psychiatric facility 50 miles away, Ms. Clark sat by a window, watching snow begin to fall. In her hands was a card covered in children's handwriting, messages of forgiveness from parents who had somehow found the capacity for compassion beyond their pain. She couldn't fully understand it yet, but the doctors said that was okay. Healing happened slowly, like trees growing from saplings, like communities rebuilding after storms. Outside her window, in a world that had continued turning despite everything, winter settled gently over forests and towns alike, covering old paths and making way for new ones to be discovered when spring returned.